Hello Year 10, how are you all? I hope you're all really well. I'm missing you all. I love it when I get little messages from some of you, and I love seeing all the work that you're doing. Lots of you doing really, really well. I know it's really hard. And so I thought I'd have a little go at the technology today and just give you a few pointers in the next lesson and see whether that was helpful or not. So let me know, excuse me. Whether you think it helps or not. I'm just going to talk you through these slides today. You know this slide that you get at the beginning. We'll do the knowledge recall in a minute, but really today you're going to be looking at some analysis of the poem London. So hopefully you have looked at that, done the annotations last week. If you can't find the videos that help you to annotate the poems, then just let me know. I can send those to you, resend them to you if you need. But if you have done those annotations, we started thinking about it yesterday, about how to write about it, and we're going to continue with that today. So first things first, a little bit of knowledge recall. So if you just have a look at these, pause the screen, just try and find the answers in your head. You can write them down if you want, if it's easier. Excuse me, write them down, see what you can remember, and then carry on with the video. Okay, so did you get these answers right? Pause the video again and have a little quick look. I'm not going to go through them. It's just for you to check that you are keeping on top of all the things that you're learning as the weeks go on. Okay, so back to today's lesson then. So the learning outcome is to continue to analyse the language of the poem. And as it says here, let me see if I can get my mouse. Don't know if that might be annoying. We're continuing to think about how Blake explores the lack of power people had in London. So that's really what this poem London is about. It's about lack of power for the people, unlike something like Ozymandias, where that was really about the power that people had. So you're going to be drafting some C's paragraphs about key quotations. There's lots of help. So I'm just going to go through the presentation now and explain what you need to do. So that's the question. You should have copied that down yesterday. How does William Blake explore the lack of power people had in London? You should have that copied down. This is a slide from yesterday. There was also the introduction, which we gave you last week, right at the beginning of this study in this poem, this sort of summary, a good sentence to remember, a bleak exploration of a city in which many people are suffering from a lack of control over their own lives. Okay, so you can use that as your introduction. You should have copied that down from yesterday. Now, what yesterday's lesson asked you to do was to take each of these 4 statements, which are going to be the statements for 4 paragraphs you'd write, and to find evidence from the poem and try and think about the terminology that you would use for each of those. So I hope that you were able to do that. I'm just going to go quickly have a look at the poem to see where you can find this information, because that'll be useful later on if you didn't manage it yesterday. If you did, you can fast forward through this bit, I guess. So first of all, Blake is critical of the restrictions placed on London and those who live there. So on your annotated poem, this bit here at the top, where it talks about the charted streets, the charted Thames, and the mine-forged manacles, that bit there as well, all of that would be good evidence for the first statement. The second statement, where Blake describes the lack of power experienced by those in London and the negative effect it has on everybody, well, I think the second verse here is about lack of power. You could talk about the mine-forged manacles there, or the cry of fear, or the last verse, which talks about the prostitute, the harlot. So those would both be good bits of evidence to put in for the second statement. The third statement is about the church's actions. Hopefully you found that in the third verse, the chimney sweeper's cry and the blackening church, and you've got notes about that. And the fourth point was about the monarchy, the palace walls, and that section there is around by lines 11 and 12. So what you were supposed to do yesterday was to gather the quotations and start to think about, a bit like on this slide, what terminology you might use, what techniques were used. Now, if you didn't manage to do that yesterday, then I think you can probably skip straight to today's lesson. If you did, you're going to have a little bit less to do today. Because what you're essentially doing today is doing a sort of explosion of each quotation, a bit like this, to show your understanding of how to put together a seized paragraph. So here's this first statement. Blake is critical of the restrictions placed on London and those who live there. The evidence that's been picked out: I wander down each chartered street near where the Charters Thames does flow. Over to the inference. So the inference, the repetition of chartered emphasises Blake's resentment that previously public land has been sold off and made private. In this sense, the chartered land becomes a symbol of how controlled London has become by those who can afford to buy it. Zooming in on words, okay, the focus on where chartered Thames does flow shows that even the most natural of features is now being controlled. And you've got an alternative interpretation there, which is what you want to be looking at for higher marks. And then the final exploration about why really Blake is writing like this. Perhaps Blake is being critical of the effect of industrialisation that saw land being chartered, etc. So I'm not going to read it all, but you know how to do a seized paragraph, but that is a model for you of what you are aiming for. If you are aiming for the highest marks, then have a look at this little bit of extension here, and just pause the video and have a read through that and think about how you're going to extend your paragraphs. So that one's done for you, and that's where the text bit of quotation came from. So the next statement, Blake describes the lack of power experienced by those in London. You now need to fill in the inference, the evidence, first, then the inference, zoom, explore, etc., and the extend if you can. So if you do have a printer, I guess you could print these out, but it really doesn't matter. Otherwise, you can just do it like we do in lessons, where you write the quotation in the middle of the page and you write the rest of it around it. Or I guess you could write it straight out as a seized paragraph if you wanted. Remember for the second statement there, the lack of power, we said that you could look at the second paragraph or the last paragraph for your evidence there. So you're going to fill that one in. Do the same for statement 3, Blake's scathing of the church's actions. Remember, this is where the evidence is for that one, in lines 9 and 10. And finally, Blake's condemnation of the monarchy. And that's where the mention of the monarchy is in lines 11 and 12. And I even put a ring round here on the notes that link to those lines there. So you should have lots of things to help you fill in those sheets. You've done them before at school. You know how to do seized paragraphs. I think you're all going to be amazing. And you've done bits of it before for this poem, but this is just really consolidating your knowledge. So good luck and off you go. And there's an extension task if you finish.